It's wonderful to see so many of you here for tonight's lecture. This is quite a special evening for us because it's the first cooperation with dear Catherine Klinger and the Second Generation Network, which she has been established. So tonight we will talk about when diversity was normality in late Habsburg Austrian Vienna. Our lecturer of tonight will be Dr. Tamara Scher. She is a historian. She's a historian teaching at the University of Vienna at the Institute for East European History and is specialized in the diversity of religion, language, and nationality of the late Habsburg monarchy. In the past, she has worked and held fellowships and has taught at various institutions, among them the Pontifical Institute Santa Maria dell'Anima in Rome and the Andras University in Budapest. Currently, she is heading a research project entitled Turning a Forgotten Burial Place of 450 Austrian-Hungarian soldiers from First World War in Rome into a 21st century memorial. Catherine Klinger, whom I have presented already, is the initiator and of this lecture series, The Arc of History. Previously, she was the director of Second Generation Trust, a UK-based charity specializing in post-Holocaust generational consequences. She has organized a number of groundbreaking conferences in London, Berlin, and Vienna in the 90s, aiming at bringing together descendants of both victims and perpetrators. Catherine ran the educational department of the Wiener Holocaust Library for decades, and she has recently acquired also the Austrian citizenship. With that, I want to hand over to Catherine to tell you a little bit more about this series, which we are planning to do with her and her network. And I all wish you a wonderful evening with both Tamara Scher and Catherine Klinger. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everybody, and thank you so much for coming to this first event in a series, and for Waltraud's kind and generous introduction. The impetus behind this series of lectures came from my own questioning of the process, meaning and potential of my own receiving of Austrian citizenship last year. Whilst a future lecture will explore in depth some of the issues that this raised, the idea for me that acquiring citizenship at this point in my life was merely a strategic citizenship issue, a response perhaps to the Brexit vote, a way of locating myself and proving that I am a European, and a way of dealing with the Holocaust, and a response perhaps to Austria's lack of atonement. These were all perfectly good reasons on the surface, and yet they were not quite enough. There was something else that I realized I wished to pursue when I was acquiring the citizenship. Do I actually have any need or a desire to have a connection with Austria? Was my first question. Am I reclaiming something that I should always have had anyway? Do I have any responsibility towards Austria now, especially as I now can exercise my right to vote? Is my citizenship a right or a privilege? And in what ways do I connect with the country if I go? Do I go as a visitor, a tourist, or a citizen? Or is it my right and privilege to have nothing to do with any of this? As a means of stimulating my own thinking process, I realized that becoming more educated about the history of Austria and the Austro-Hungarian Empire seemed to be an important start. In other words, my expertise about the period 1938 to 1945 was no longer all that I wanted to know about. After all, this was the very period where my own family were no longer in the country, or in fact dead. What of the time leading up to this 7-year period? Surely this had more profoundly shaped and influenced my family's sense of connection. And what did I really know about the extraordinary 50-year period before they left? And in the 50-year post-war aftermath, apart from dismissing rather glibly often Austria's response and first victim narrative, I knew so little until I realized that I was now eligible to become an Austrian citizen if I chose to. Perhaps like many here, I had always been drawn to the Vienna of 1900, with its extraordinary creativity, innovation, questioning, and period of transition. But alongside this, the darker backdrop, away from Freud, from Klimt, from Schnitzler, what else was actually going on? Did I really know, or was I content to connect with a somewhat nostalgic and romantic view of Vienna, with the Anschluss as an event that somehow appeared out of nowhere and somehow seemed always unfathomable? It is some of these questions and ideas that I hope this lecture series will address. The idea of 6 lectures taking place over the next year is what Waltraud and I have been discussing, taking us through approximately 120 years of Austrian history, encompassing so many aspects: politics, demographics, architecture, innovation, memory, and so on. This was an idea that Waltraud and I started discussing about a year ago, and I'm incredibly grateful for her and her team for their enthusiasm, encouragement, and understanding of the importance of us working together on this project. I hope that as a conclusion, or perhaps even a new beginning, we will have a 5-day conference in Vienna in a year, next year, and that will explore in greater depth some of the themes that we will be touching on throughout the lecture series in the next year. We have a second lecture already planned, and the lecturer is in the audience for the 19th of June, but I will announce that in more detail at the end of this lecture. I'm sure that many of you here are familiar with the Jewish Yiddish birthday greeting, bis 120, a blessing to live so long, as in the case of Moses, yet also a huge challenge to be able to look forward as well as back, to stay young in spirit and keep to our ideals, give back to the community and share our wisdom with those who will come after us. Perhaps this is part of our task during this momentous 120-year period, where we have been both so very present and also so very absent. With this in mind, I'm delighted to introduce Tamara Scheer from the Institute for East European History to deliver the first of our Arc of History lectures. She begins by taking us back to the beginning of this period, to a time where the population of Vienna was diverse and multicultural, and the political and cultural center of a significant and complex empire. It was a time of enormous expansion, movement, and growth, and at its heart was a population drawn from so many different backgrounds, and hence the intriguing, if perhaps somewhat surprising, title of When Diversity Was Normality.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the invitation to talk about my research. And thank you all for coming. Well, when diversity was normality, and you see above, this is a little part of the address book of Vienna from around 1900. And even if you don't speak German, you quickly realize that not all of these names are quite a big number of these names are not from German language. I just put you to like Hanak or Kraus. Kraus not written just with an S, but with an SZ, which usually indicates that he might grew up in Hungary, or also Kudrnac and Poborski. So how did I get back to this really fascinating and really important historical source? There was a big discussion last year in Vienna because a right-wing politician came up usually repeatedly to come up with that Vienna, because of their migration, turns into something it has never been before. More multicultural, more religions, more languages. And I was just thinking of, because a lot of people approach me like, hey, you're a historian. Do you have any argument how to cope with that when they come up with that? And I said, well, might be one of these occasions where words are not enough. And so I thought, like, let's have a look into the address book, because I remembered when I used it last time that there is plenty of names which are not of German origin. And to be honest, I was really surprised how few are of German origin. So I have put here one up which contain a lot of German names. There is pages where they come from South Slav background, Polish background, Ukrainian background, and so forth. So this is why I also used it as the cover image, because I can just as a historian also tell you, look into a phone book. I mean, there you really find out who lived there actually. Might not have been citizens, might not have been lived there for long, but that's the people you met on a regular basis when you strolled through a city, or you are still strolling through a city. But because Catherine told me, don't go too early into detail, but tell the people how this Austria-Hungary looked like, I just want to draw attention on the birthday of this Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it was in 1867. So in 1867 it happened that something which was called Austria for a long time turned into Austria-Hungary because of an agreement, settlement. There is really a huge dispute among Habsburg historians how to call it. So I think settlement might be the best, because it was really up to negotiations from two sides. I've put this up here, which somehow in pink shows you the Hungarian part, and the one which is more like yellow, orange, or green is the Austrian part. But what does it mean? What does it mean that a former Austrian empire turned into Austria-Hungary? And I've put here up some things I sometimes even have to remind myself when I'm investigating in archives, historical sources, and political debates. So Austria-Hungary was one empire, but it was at the same time two states. So after this settlement, there were lots of responsibilities, state responsibilities divided. Or let's say it like this, what was left as a joint responsibility. So they had a joint army. It's usually when you see UK, it means it's something joint. The foreign affairs was joint, but usually the ambassadors were of Hungarian origin. And they had a finance ministry which headed the expenses of the foreign affairs and the joint army. What was also of joint responsibility was Bosnia-Herzegovina, which was occupied in 1878. So this is the two states organized together. But then all the really important state affairs, so the ones which really affected the citizens on a daily life basis, had been split among the two. I mean, how often has an ordinary citizen to do with the army or with the foreign affairs? But they have to do with, like, in which language are the schools run? Or how do they deal with religious affairs? I always make the joke, like, the biggest difference was the one that lots of Austrian citizens wanted to have the Hungarian citizenship because it was allowed to become divorced there. In Austria, not. So that's really the thing why lots of people applied for Hungarian citizenship, but far from that. So as I said, there was not one citizenship. There was an Austrian one and a Hungarian one. Also, the emperor was in Hungary a king, and he was an emperor in Austria. So it was the same person, but with the divided responsibilities. There was an old parliament in Budapest, and there was one in Vienna. So which means there were two different constitutions. What is really important when it comes to diversity is that these constitutions had several approaches how to deal with this language diversity of their citizens. I mean, in Austria, you had this famous Article 19, which said that all, they used the term back then, Völker. Later on, they did not call them peoples any longer, rather nationalities. All the nationalities have the right to use their own language when they deal with state affairs, like when they joined the army, when they had just something before court to organize. So they were allowed to. This does not mean that it was adopted as it was meant to be in the Constitution. There were lots of failures of the system, of course, due to nationalism, rising nationalism, but finally there was no state language. It was argued that German was just the language for the ministries, so a lingua franca, to know when all these state affairs and offices corresponded to one another, that they used the same language. But finally, it was somehow transformed into the state language, although it was not by constitution. There is an opposite in Hungary going on, because Hungary had a state language. It was Hungarian, but Hungary was not less diverse as Austria was. But they were called minority languages. So people did not, by constitution, had the right to use the language in the schools and in the army and so on. So it was a minority language. While in Austria, there was no term like minority language. It was all the people's languages make up the Austrian state. What is important also with these constitutions, and this not only, but very much affected the Jewish population, is that both constitutions, somehow for the first time, it was like there was no numerus clausus, for example, for the Jewish citizens to join the army, to join the ministry, to become bureaucrats. So all these things which had been known for so many centuries, they were totally abandoned. So everybody has the right to take up every profession. Regardless of the religion. What is also really important is this freedom of settlement. So all, regardless of the religion, are allowed to settle here and there, wherever they want to in Austria-Hungary. But what is really important that, and this goes along somehow similar as in Hungary, is like German had been the lingua franca, which means Korea was mostly bound to know the German language as it was in Hungary. So how does this parliament look like? And Catherine asked me, like, so here's the history of the state. You're now allowed to, or some of you are now allowed to vote the delegates. So it draws back, it's still the same building. So it was called the Reichsrat in Vienna. It was a two-chamber parliament, but the ones elected were the Abgeordneten and the delegates. And if you look on the left, it's just a little screenshot from their name. So they came from all over Austria. They had the right to use their language when they debated in the parliament, but usually most of them gave their speeches in German to be understood by most in the auditorium. What is really fun is when you read the parliamentary minutes, when you have all the different languages in it, because usually the delegates started, said a couple of sentences in their own language and then turned to German. I've brought you up this from how this parliament worked or did not, as a famous quotation from Mark Twain's Stirring Times in Austria. So Mark Twain spent some time in Vienna and in Austria, and he also attended from the gallery to some of these parliamentary meetings. And he published this already in 1898. And he said, there is a constitution and there is a parliament. The House draws its membership from 425 deputies. These men represent peoples who speak 11 languages. That means 11 distinct varieties of jealousies, hostilities, and warring interests. This could be expected to furnish forth a parliament of a pretty inharmonious sort and make legislation difficult at times, and it does that. The parliament is split up into many parties: the clericals, the progressists, the German nationalists, the Young Czechs, and the Social Democrats. If you read the minutes, really often it's like that each nationality came up with the same complaints, but usually they did not try and like to really then convince and change something. This is really something obvious if you go through the parliamentary meetings. What does it also mean if you have no official state language? So in Hungary, all these orders, given all the laws issued are exclusively in Hungarian, while in Austria they had to be translated into all the recognized languages. So you usually ended up like with all the bilingual or 3 languages. It depends on the province. But if you're interested in this, so a lot of things have been now digitized, which means you can also, under ALEX, the Austrian National Library, you can go through these parliamentary minutes and through all these legislation on your own, if you like. And you also even see, and this is money from Kronen money. You can see that on the right, I've copied out the part below. You see that it's in all the different languages written. So what about Vienna? I've said already that there had been a parliament based in Vienna, and all these delegates came from all the parts, from Austria, like in the east, which is today Ukraine, from Lviv, and then really something particular, Vorarlberg, this part of Austria. I've been only once so far. So from all or today northern Italy, Trentino, so they came from all these nationalities and parts of Austria. And what I really liked is, and this is taken from memoirs of Lilian Bader, and she grew up in Vienna in the 2nd district, and she wrote, even when I was very young, it was not unusual for me to hear foreign languages. People I saw every day only spoke broken German. The cobbler who repaired our shoes spoke Czech. The man who sold eggs and butter directly from the farm may have been from the other half of the empire across the border. He was a Hungarian. The man who called out loudly in the street that he was buying old clothes was Polish. The ice cream seller with the small cart and a jingling bell was Italian. He came from the south of the monarchy around Trieste. In this empire, 18 different languages were spoken, and God knows how many dialects. Vienna, as the center of the empire, must have exerted a magnetic attraction. So as you can see, and when we think back of the political debate last year about Vienna's non-existing historic diversity, if you're a historian and work on sources on these days, whatever you find, the first thing is about the diversity of Vienna in these days. And also I want to draw on this because I found this book downstairs in the library, Arthur Schnitzler, first page. He came to Vienna, his mother spoke this language, his father this language, but he didn't feel extraordinary in Vienna because it's so multilingual. So I like to use this map. It's from Wikipedia with my students, and we can discuss about that for an hour because it's really like never trust any map or statistics you have not put up on your own. Because here you can see like it's about the language is spoken and then here transformed into nationality belonging. And it's a map from these days, so it's from 1911. Here it's called the races in Austria-Hungary. But what is really important for this lecture is that Vienna is purely in red, purely Germans, no one else. And also like today's Czech Republic, there is this blue, only Czech speakers, red, only German speakers. What is really important is that very often, also in Austro-Hungarian times, this was made up in a way that there was the census, people were asked about their language use, and then even when it was like 51% speakers in German and 49 in Czech, then it totally turned into red or blue. So what these statistics and maps usually don't see is that everything was like mixed up. So there was hardly any place which was purely German. I was really surprised. So Salzburg is really purely German. When I went for a project about the conscripts for the Joint Army, I went through the personnel files of the conscripts, and there was really, in a box of 300, there was 3 times mentioned that someone spoke another language than German. Well, when you go through Vienna, it's like really a big bulk spoke out of languages, and also not German as their first. Religious affiliations, and it's again, it's the same picture, like, and it's somehow how they made up the map and the statistics. It's like, it looks like Vienna, there is only Catholics, but here it says like more than 90%. I would take that into question, that more than 90% in Vienna were of Roman Catholic faith. But it's also like, who has been asked, when, how, and was it only those who really had a residency right in Vienna and who then made up their statistics, and it's not the ones who actually really lived there. So what else can, when I as a historian wants to find out who lived in Vienna and who, which languages did they speak, there is plenty of different kinds of archival sources you can use. One is, for example, that's from the census from 1913. Also, this is, thanks to the Austrian National Library, available online and digitized, so you can go through it. And it shows like Vienna had more than 2 million residents in 1910. And then they show you where they are born. So there was one category in Vienna, the second category in the province, so Vienna was part of Lower Austria, in another country, and in a foreign country. So within another country, they meant the rest of Austria, so like Styria, Bohemia, Moravia, Galicia, for example. And in a foreign country, they included, of course, Hungary, because it's a different citizenship, so it's a foreign country. And where did they come from? So, I forgot to show you the numbers. I mean, in Vienna, already born is about half, and the other is split up in another province, which does not mean that they came from today's Austria, but really from Galicia to today's northern Italy. So where did they actually really come from? And then there is very many, I think it's the biggest group make up from the lands of the Hungarian crown, so from Hungary. Then it's almost 140,000. Bosnia, 1,000, but rising numbers. From Italy, 34.
Only men.
That's only men, yeah. Only men. They were asked usually in the census. So they were asked, which languages does your household speak? And then they answered for all of them. Thank you for that. Yeah, only men. Bavarians, Saxony, Prussia is also a really important group. Also 10,000 from Russia. France is not many, and from England, 1,100. There is even more from America. Usually with America, they meant United States. So it was not also Austrian citizens who spoke different languages from across Austria or from Hungary, but it was also lots of people from foreign countries, from real foreign countries, not Hungary. What about the religious and language diversity? So we can see here for Vienna, of course, the biggest group is from Roman Catholic and Armenian Catholic, Greek Catholic, and so-called Old Catholics. But then you have pretty much everything. When they call it Orientalisch, Oriental, they usually meant Orthodox. So Oriental was the terminus technicus, the bureaucratic one, before 1918. You have plenty of different kinds of Protestants. You have Israelitisch, means Jewish, and some others. What is a really low number but high if you compare it with the rest of Austria-Hungary is without any confession. And what about they're not called in a census for what's your first language or your mother tongue. This is also a big difference with Hungary. In Hungary, during the census, they were asked for their anyanyelv, which means your mother's language. In the Austrian part, they were only asked for your daily colloquial language, so the language you most often use, which makes up, I mean, they already had some rules, because usually it was army conscripts who went from house to house who asked the people about that, and they tried to instruct them that people might not answer honest. but because out of political interest or something like that. So, for example, if they go through Prague and there is Czech-speaking family, they of course know German. They most of the day use German, but they answer with Czech just to raise the number of Czech speakers. So also these figures are not really trustworthy, but the bulk here mentions German. However, as I said, treat this really carefully because very often they ended up as German because of how they were questioned during the census. So where else to find the diversity of the residents? And as I said in the beginning, it's the address book of Vienna. Also, this is thankfully available online already through the Vienna Library. And you can scroll through the names. And as you can see, lots of non-German origin. Although what is really important to mention with the surnames, there was a joke already in Habsburg times that you cannot say or assign someone a nationality because of his surname. And there was this joke going on which went somehow like this. Oh, there is a Czech nationalist mayor in a village in Bohemia whose surname is Müller. Well, in the neighboring village, there is a German nationalist mayor whose name is Benesch. I mean, this was a joke, but I found really famous examples that this joke was true, actually. So very often people had a German surname, but they identified with a totally different nationality. Oh, I've said that already. Sometimes this happens to me. There is just, because if you go through memoirs, and this is another really interesting kind of source. Also, I've brought here Arthur Schnitzler's His Childhood in Vienna. You find this diversity really very often in memoirs and printed diaries and all kinds of autobiographical sources. And this is one from Ricco Pizzini. I mean, sounds very Italian, right? And he wrote, of course, people wanted to label me as a real Katzelmacher. That's a really not nice term in German language for the Italians because of my name, even though I was born in Vienna and don't understand a word of Italian. So this is also something you very often come across if you read these novels. Where else to find? I have to say, I recently finished my habilitation, and it was about language identity and loyalty in the Austro-Hungarian army. So I went through all the conscripts' personnel files, because this is really a source which more or less a kind of source that survived for all parts of Austria-Hungary. So, which means like you have these forms, they look the same regardless if you work in Lviv in Ukraine in the archive or in Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And what you see here is, I've told you that in the census in Austria, they ask for the colloquial daily life language. The army had another version of how to ask, and they asked the conscripts during the medical examination, like, which languages do you speak and which languages do you write? And then they wrote that down. And we have here one, and this is Vienna, who mentions German and Bohemian. And then Bohemian is underlined. With Bohemian, they usually meant Czech. That's really important. And the other one, and he is born in Vienna. He wasn't born in Vienna, he was born in Bohemia, but then he moved to Vienna. And the other one, Holzmann Severin, is also mentioned to speak. He speaks only Bohemian, which means Czechs, but he lives in Vienna. So what can this kind of source tells us? One thing is that about 20% of the conscripts who then might join the famous Vienna house regiment called the Deutschmeister, so the German masters, were of Czech origin. What else can it tell us? Does this person who works in Vienna really only speaks Bohemian? So very often, like in the census, it was like these conscripts, working class people, farmers, they knew what happened with the information they gave to the army. So as soon as he mentioned, I also speak German, he might have ended up in a German-speaking company, because very often they said, oh, we have all these German speakers here, so we do not have to give them the constitutional right to be trained in their native tongue. So lots of them refuse to mention that they speak German. And sometimes you find in these personnel files that someone later added speaks also German. Diversity is part of many, many novels, famous ones. And I'm really lucky I went through this library downstairs today, because there is, in particular after 1918, lots of people wrote about how they remembered the monarchic times, the Habsburg times. This phenomena did not only appear for German language. You have plenty of similar novels written in Hungarian, in Czech, in Croatian. Might be a different tone in a way of we're happy that we're now got rid of them, but sometimes they were all, today we would say they went viral. So these are books everybody read, everybody had in his private library. But today they are very often really, they have not survived, because many of them never made it into a public library, or they were in a public library, but afterwards they throw it away because they said, oh, it's nothing of worth of being kept. So many of these viral novels today, you really hardly find. For example, it's not the case for Otto Friedländer, Letzter Glanz der Märchenstadt. So Otto Friedländer also was very much into Viennese, and he lived in Vienna, and he wrote a lot of novels about how Vienna was. And he also put an emphasis on its population. And it's a really nice scene, because it's also connected to the army. Leaning against the gray wall of a house in the middle of the city is a shepherd in embroidered white fur. People call him a Krovot. Krovot is a term for Croatians in German. I mean, you wouldn't use it, it's not nice. Because the Viennese call everything that wears white and looks like a farmer a Krovot. An officer walks past and speaks to him in his own language. The man is not at all surprised, because it goes without saying that a sensible person knows his language. He's a Husul, the officer explains. He has come on foot from the Carpathians to visit his son, who is serving in the army in Vienna. So what is really important to say is one thing that they put emphasis on, that officers were forced to learn the language of the conscripts. I mean, they had a 3 years window to learn them. If they didn't know, they usually managed to get to another language environment. So lots of them did not learn the language properly. As I said in the beginning, you had on the one hand the constitution and the right, which does not mean that it was really implemented properly all the times. But finally, it was something everybody highlighted as something we give them the right, and we try to learn the languages. And Husul, it's an ethnic group in today's Ukraine. It depends on, sometimes it's been said it's a mixture of Polish and Ukrainian, but what is really important to say is that this officer exactly knew with whom he is speaking. What is also important is, and it's a different kind of diversity, the military diversity. So it was common practice in Austria-Hungary that there was the common conscription, and usually when they were enlisted, about 1/4 or 1/3 of these soldiers did not do their 3 years military service in their home region, but they were sent somewhere else, which means people from Vienna, or soldiers from Vienna, or 20% of them were Czech speakers, were sent somewhere, to Bosnia, to Galicia. But on the other way, this meant that lots from other parts of Austria-Hungary were sent to Vienna. So this adds military diversity. What is also how, and I promise that I will also show what to find on this historic diversity today if you stroll through Vienna. Unfortunately, not much. Usually it's something that you already have to know a lot about Vienna's history to really find out who resided there before 1918. What is really important is this many Czech speakers who lived in Vienna. And there was this joke that Vienna was the first or second biggest Czech city before 1918. And somehow this is really true. But what you also had, which means like if they're Roman Catholics, or also when they are Jews, that the language in which you do a religious service is really important. And so as soon as they were here, the religious communities had to be organized in their language. And I was not aware of, but there were, for each Vienna district, there was minimum one chaplain who spoke Czech, and he was attached to that to do all the spiritual care for the Czech speakers. And there is also still an Italian community, a Hungarian-speaking community, and what is on the right is the former Bohemian Chancellery. This is from Maria Theresia times, but the Czech National Church is right next to this building. And they also have a really nice, fine archive. How you also recognize where all these Vienna residents came from is when you go through Vienna and find the, I always forget how it's called in English, stumbling stones, thank you. The stumbling stones, because sometimes there is mentioned from where they were born. And there is one where you see Vienna, but then you have Czernowitz, Chernivtsi, which is today Ukraine. And you see on that where they were born that lots of residents lived in Vienna before 1918 too, who did not come, who were not German-speaking Roman Catholics from Lower Austria, as the census might suggest, or some of the maps. But there were already, despite that diversity, which was just reality, normality, and praised by some parts, there had also been voices already against this diversity. And one of the most important historic figures for Vienna was Karl Lueger, the mayor of Vienna, appointed in 1897. How long I'm speaking? I have 8 more minutes. Excellent. You see there is still a monument on him in the first district, which has been recently, as you can see on the graffiti, discussion has started what to do with this monument. Because he held speeches, and Francis Joseph, even when he was appointed, he refused to accept him as mayor because he said he's a demagogue, he is against all the nationalities, he is a nationalist, he is against the Jews and everybody who is not fitting into his kind of living style he hopes that Vienna should look like. So Francis Joseph, for a couple of times, refused to accept him as mayor, although he was appointed and elected. But he afterwards then had to resign, and Francis Joseph had to accept him. There was some pressure. And there is still a monument on him, and now there is the discussion started because he was, for me as historian, the worst is not what he said in public speeches. So he somehow he was not stupid, he was clever what to say in public. But for me as a historian, the worst is when I read diaries where people who liked his kind of political style, why they liked him. And I've brought you just one example from Josef Redlich, who wrote, Lueger made it possible that a new and healthy Austrian state sense emerged. How pity, how stupid, and how culturally hostile the coalition of restless Jewish journalists, dirty speculators, and hypocritical liberal politicians that prevailed in Vienna before Lueger. Sometimes you find among his supporters words you might expect for later times in Austria because of all the nationalism and anti-Semitism. So even worse is when his supporters wrote about what he liked on him. So as you can see now today, discussion started. When I started studying at the University of Vienna, the famous Ringstraße, where the main building is located, this part where the university is, was still called Dr. Karl Lueger Ring. It has been only recently been renamed to University Ring. Yeah. So there is still, yeah. Yeah, so this has recently really, when I started doing history in Vienna and I read these diaries already and I strolled through this place, it was always like, how can this still be? So at the moment, yeah, let's see what they will then do. But it was not only Luega. There was lots of others who already argued quite loudly about against the diversity, who were nationalists, who were anti-Semites, and one of these famous so-called humoristic journalists, Kikeriki, openly used like stereotypes, which you also might only expect to come up later in Austria and in Germany, but not before 1918. So you have phrases and you have stereotypes used, which was already there before 1918 in a growing number. But well, just one thing to add, not only in German language. So if you go through Hungarian newspapers of that time from Budapest or Croatian language newspapers, you find also lots of anti-Semitism there. And now I come for the last couple of slides to the First World War. How was the diversity in Vienna reflected? I may draw your attention on something might be unusual. It's the Vienna Police Archive. And they have some 10 boxes about denunciation during the First World War. And usually when you denounced, although someone did nothing wrong, against Serbs, Ruthenians, Ukrainians, Italians, Romanians, Jews, and Czechs. Usually you were taken seriously. If you came up and denounced someone who is a German speaker, Hungarian speaker, usually the officer said like, yeah, that's not true, we're not. But very often it was directed against this nationalities and the Jews. They were taken seriously, and lots of people were imprisoned, or even there was even death penalties because it started with a denouncement, which was totally untrue. But Vienna was still, during the First World War, a diverse city as it has been before, and also the publishing houses were still there, and they published in plenty of languages. And I've brought you just this, and you can see on the pen here how small this booklet is. So during the First World War, they very often had to publish for the war effort, and this is an example for a praying booklet for Jewish warriors, written by the head of the Jewish military spiritual care, in Vienna, Arnold Frankfurter, and it was issued in Hungarian, in German, and in Hebrew. Yeah, and this might be the last slide to show you again that it was a diverse city, a diverse country, and very often they took the languages into account. And this is called the famous "I'm healthy, I'm fine" postcard, because there was harsh censorship, and very often letters from the front or to the front were thrown away because there was no censor around some office who knew all the languages in which the letters had been. And so they introduced very soon and very quickly in the war these cards where people were not allowed to put anything on there, but I think the most important sentences were in all the languages covered, I'm still alive. What you can see today is, and I want to draw your attention on a place which might be not so prominent. I mean, not the Central Cemetery. Lots of people go to the Central Cemetery, but lots of people don't know that if you pass this cemetery, and it's about 20 minutes walk from the entrance there is a Jewish section there, and there is lots of graves from the Jewish population from Vienna who served in the First World War in Austro-Hungarian uniforms and never came back, and they are still visible there. Yeah, and also if you grab a bit, it's like lots of communities in Vienna and their associations celebrate these days, or the last couple of years, like 130 years of this association of Polish language, or the Komensky, which is the Czech school association, it's 150 years, which if you count back, it's like, oh, they had already been there and they had been really big before 1918, and they all lived in Vienna. So my conclusion is, of course, I'm doing diversity. That's my research interest. But if I stroll through Vienna, even when I really look for the traces of these people, they are totally underrepresented in museums, in the collections, in the streets, which I think should be changed. So Vienna appears in history like German-speaking and mostly Catholic. But to be someone from Vienna means like you live in a city which has been by no means monolingual and only one religion, but has been diverse for centuries. So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much for this fascinating lecture on exactly the diversity, the cultural diversity of this land. As when I was thinking that what brought me to organize these lectures was the issue of my Austrian citizenship, but of course, actually, very much more at the heart of it is something much more complicated, which is the Austro-Hungarian side of it, and the diversity and how complicated that is. And at the same time, it also gives, for that particular period the earlier period that you have researched, a sense of a continuity and something positive, I think I'm right, from the way in which, unless I'm romanticizing it, but the way in which there was so much cultural diversity, so many languages spoken, so many people from so many different parts of the empire that came to this melting pot of Vienna. And is that a romantic view, that it was actually generally quite a harmonious way of living together, or is that actually true?
Well, there were plenty of conflicts. I've shared here only 2 or 3 slides which showed or put attention on the conflicts. I mean, I think what is really important is that conflicts did not only arise because people spoke different languages, had different religious affiliations, but it was also because of political tensions, like ideology, working class against conservatives, liberals against Christian socialists. So also the Social Democrats, finally they were split up into a German Social Democratic Party and a Czech Social Democratic Party. But what I want to draw attention on is that, like, it's not only nationalities and religions why people conflict. And also, if you go through the denouncing letters, usually neighbors denounced each other, even when they were both German speakers and both Catholic. So there is always a different side too. So of course the nationalities and the anti-Semitism are strongly visible in these sources. But if you go through it, it's mostly neighbors or wife, husband, or other way around.
So I'd like to open this up now to the floor. If you have a comment or a question, if you could please try to keep it as brief as possible, but I'm sure Tamara will be delighted to answer. The gentleman here.
Did you form any view as to why the diversity is now underrepresented?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm asking myself that too. I mean, When I grew up in Vienna, usually I learned in school that everybody hated the Habsburgs and the monarchy because it was a prison of peoples. So this was what I knew from these days because I was taught that. And then I started, and I found out it was a mixture, and sometimes the mixture worked, and sometimes it did not. And even some of these famous founders of Czechoslovakia, they expressed their gratitude to Francis Joseph regularly and said, as long as he's alive, we will never really come up to do an independent state. So, and this is what I've learned from that. Why it's only German? It was already, German was dominating already before 1918. So even when, for example, Styria was officially bilingual, Carinthia was officially bilingual, there was always this attempt like to have one language, and just, it's a really tricky question. So, and I mean, it's such a colorful, you have to know the languages to really get into these archives to bring up. So very often, I always call it like, very often I read books which have on their cover like it's about Austria-Hungary, and then it's only German, in German language, the sources. So it has very often nothing to do with nationalism or to get the others out. It's just because people involved don't speak the languages. I would say. And also you will find in my books that I don't speak Ruthenian. I mean, it was really hard to get through the Hungarian parliamentary minutes. But it has also something with it. So it's not that people want to intentionally exclude the others. But you always need a team of people covering all the languages. So you can't do Austro-Hungarian history only in a team. And it's great to do it in a team because you then get all the different kinds of perspectives. And what I think is also what Catherine said, it's very often people come up with the question, oh, it's like today in the European Union. And I said, do you know what I learned, which might be important for the European Union? As soon as you have more than one language, it will never go perfectly. Never. And will cost a lot of money because you have to translate everything, even if there is only one who knows this language. But you have to use, whenever possible, all the languages, just that no one feels like he is marginalized. I think this is really important. And it will never run perfectly because it's not working. But who cares? As long as you represent, really, you try to represent everybody. Sometimes it worked back then, but very often not.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Of course, in Habsburg Prague, there was very distinct separation between Czech speakers and German speakers. You had the Czech university, the German university, hospitals, and so on. Although they may have spoken each other's languages, the German, the literature, Kafka and his mob, all German speakers, all written in German. But did you have the same separation, as it were, in Vienna between the German speakers, the Czech speakers, and so on?
Yeah, officially in Vienna, there was only German recognized as language. Now it comes a bit confusing, but there is the right that there was the constitutional right that everybody has the right to use his and her language when there is school education and so on. But this was passed on to the provinces, which means like Lower Austria claimed for itself in 1867 that the only language, historical language used there is German. While in Bohemia, it had been two, Czech and German. So it was left to the provinces. And then there was also this, only when in a municipality, one language group made up 20%, then the other language had to be taken into account equally. So that's the complex thing, which sometimes worked and sometimes not. So when I started doing, and we call each other Habsburg historians, it was this prison of peoples. Then we researched and argued like in a way, okay, it didn't work perfectly, but they tried to have a Czech. So you can interpret the Czech university in a way that they get the right to have their own university. But on the other hand, you can always also say like with this right, the Habsburg bureaucratic state supported that they were separated all the time, so that Czechs only go to Czech schools and Germans only to German schools. And what I say also for the army, it was not only a right to use someone's own language, it was also an obligation. There were lots of conscripts who said, okay, if I have to serve 3 years in the army, I want to join the German-speaking training company or the Croatian to learn the other language to somehow make sense out of this. No. You are, first language is German, German group. Czech, Czech group. So what we argue now is that at the same time where they said, like, it's your right that we use this too, and the Czech university is their right to have their own university, they really supported the separation. I mean, it's always, a coin has two metals. And it's also like, they did, I always, that's a joke, don't quote me. Okay, there is a video, but what I would have done, I know a historian shouldn't ask that question, but it's like, I would have forced the German speakers to learn Czech in primary school and the other way around. But so you somehow ended up in 1914 with really like people who did not, lived in the same place, but did not speak the other local language.
Thank you. Lady in front and then.
Would you like to comment on how you see the dialect of Wienerisch? Because I feel, my father spoke that, and I feel there are many, many words in that dialect that come from all these nationalities, and French as well.
Yeah, and I think of pissoir because you came up with or trottoir. But it's, for example, a lot of Jewish words where people usually don't know it's from Jewish, from Yiddish. I regularly say, like, when I'm lucky, I had a Masen, which comes from Mazel Tov. So, but I have to say that when I was a child, it was more often used than today. I think these words are now, unfortunately, dying out, but I still, it's a Kutzpe or, besprochen. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there is this big discussion with the German language and the Austrian German that it's these two countries are divided by the joint language. So, but it's also not. I would divide from the language use or for such terms. There is this. You have Vienna, Lower Austria, Upper Austria, Styria, and Carinthia, where you usually have more Hungarian-related words or Slavic-related words. Well, as soon as you come to Salzburg, Tyrol, don't ask about Vorarlberg, where I've been only once. Where you can really see that's a different also language culture. So very often they say, like, I don't know, when I say tomate, they beat me up in Eastern Vienna and say, that's the Germans say that. I say, I can call this however I like to call it. But there is lots of these words which you are accused to use German in Vienna, which the Tyroleans and the people from Salzburg say. And always said. So you really see that, so Vienna is still more gravitating also from food and everything. To its neighbors.
I'm not sure this is on. Can you hear me? Okay. And first of all, thank you for your many illustrations of life in Vienna. I wonder if I could just turn the discussion to death. In my family research on my Austrian family, I've been struck by two things. First of all, that it seems as though the Jewish community might have been among the most assimilated of all the foreigners, strangers in Vienna. And secondly, what on earth motivated them to call the big cemetery in Vienna the Zentralfriedhof? Central to what and whom?
Yeah, it's not Café Central. Yeah, the Jewish population, although they are often mentioned as one group. I mean, they were so diverse, that the people of Jewish confession in Austria-Hungary as the rest of this empire had been. I very often read in diaries of liberal Jews who really talked really, really bad about the Orthodox Jews who came from Galicia and also settled in Vienna. I mean, there is sometimes phrases you expect for other people later on using such stereotypes and talking so bad. So you find anti-Semitism, a lot of anti-Semitism in Jewish memoirs and diaries too. Some Jews affiliated with German nationalism, others with Czech nationalism. Sometimes you had one Jewish family in Prague, one half supporting the Germans and the others the Czechs. They were often called like they are the assimilated ones, but very often, if you then read diaries from the people they were working with, they said, what, still Jews? Something like this. So I think that the Jews are really diverse. And finally, you shouldn't call them like the Jews in Austria-Hungary, because they're so diverse, really diverse. And the Central Cemetery, yeah, that was something like, but it has to do with Joseph II, who said like, because out of hygiene reasons, the cemeteries should not be next to the churches. So they, again, the bigger Vienna grew, the more they build up new central cemeteries in the outskirts. So this is, when I first came to the UK and I saw all these graves in the city center next to the churches, I was really surprised, how can this be? Because in Vienna, it was the same, but it was already forbidden by Joseph II.
Then,
Hi. Do
yes,
something
one more question. Okay.
with this? Okay. So I was just.
Can you
Hi.
stand up, please?
Hi. I was just going to mention that, this Austro-Hungarian monarchy was an occupying power, and as well in Hungary, the parliament had to speak in German, of course. So, there was not exactly a choice there. And then I was thinking about when you talked about the army, there was a very beautiful film which actually was about a Hungarian group of soldiers who, during the 1848, tried to escape from the army, and the Viennese commanders hunted them down up till they all died on the way to Hungary. So it's quite a traumatic history for the Hungarians, actually.
Yeah, what is really important is that in 1867, when the settlement took place, you can see in lots of diaries and reports that soldiers sent from Austrian part to serve in Hungary, that they were treated as an occupier, and people were still aware. I mean, it was only not even 20 years ago when lots of these villages in vast part of Hungary were destroyed because of the fighting. Lots of people died. And so you find very often like it was, some soldiers wrote that they do not feel like being in the same empire, but they are treated by the villagers as being the enemy. So they were really unwanted. This somehow turned better after some decades, but it was still like this. And then with the Hungarian parliament, it was in Hungarian. In the beginning, they had a problem with that there was not enough people in all institutions who spoke properly enough Hungarian.
Okay, thank you so much, Tamara, for giving us this amazing insight. You will have the occasion to talk to Tamara later on. We always serve a glass of wine for the guests who come to the Austrian Cultural Forum to mingle afterwards. But before we do that, I want to thank Hannah, who has organized this evening. And Hannah is also... And Hannah is also our librarian. So whenever you are interested in using our library, please come. She's very helpful and can guide you through our treasures downstairs. But before we are going to mingle, I also would like to thank Catherine for the co-organization of this evening. And Catherine, could you tell us what will be the next lecture, please?
So a date for your diary, if you enjoyed this lecture. It's the first excellent lecture of what I think will be some really, really interesting topics in the next 9 months. And on the 19th of June, Wednesday, the 19th of June, Dr. Nicholas Sherman from the Courtauld Institute will be giving a lecture entitled Vienna 1900, Cracks in a Beautiful Facade. So I think that's something that will be of interest for many of us. And we really look forward to that in 2 months' time. Thank you.